here at 93.5, 1590 WAKR. And it's time to go to film. We bring in film study professor, our good friend Joe Fortunato with us on WAKR. And Joe is going to bring up one of the iconic films of all time. Joe, good morning. Welcome to the show again, and go down your road this morning.
Good morning, Ray, and good morning, everybody. Today we're doing, it doesn't get much bigger than this in terms of classic films. Gone with the Wind from 1939, which was released in big cities in December 1939, and then it spread out to a wider release. It premiered in Atlanta, fittingly. It was directed by Victor Fleming and George Cukor, which I'll get to that story in a minute. Of course, it stars Vivien Leigh, Clark Gable, Hattie McDaniel, Thomas Mitchell. It won 8 Oscars, quite a few. It was nominated for a half dozen more. It was actually the first color film to win the Best Picture award. In 2007, the AFI list ranked it as the 6th greatest movie of all time. Several of the iconic lines, "Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn," was voted the number 1 movie quote by AFI. It also included "After all, tomorrow is another day" at number 31. "As God is my witness, I'll never go hungry again" at number 59. In fact, only Casablanca has more quotes on that AFI list of great quotes. And probably most significant of all, if we adjusted for inflation, then Gone with the Wind would be the top-grossing movie of all time. If you look at just top-grossing, movies on Box Office Mojo or wherever you go, it's, down there a little bit because of the inflation in ticket prices. But adjusted for inflation, it's the highest-grossing film and possibly even the most seen in terms of movie tickets and stuff like that. It was a huge, lavish production. The estimated production costs were about $3.9, almost $4 million, which is huge in those days. When they finished filming, they had 88 hours of footage. It was nearly 4 hours long. There were 50 speaking roles, 2,400 extras in the film. So it was really a massive undertaking.
Boy, it was. George Reeves, by the way, was one of those young actors that got his start there. And, of course, when you talk about the cast from Vivien Leigh to Clark Gable, it's a really unforgettable cast, too, that they put together for Gone with the Wind.
Yeah, absolutely. Probably the most significant, I don't want to say significant casting, but one of the most memorable things from this movie was Hattie McDaniel winning an Oscar. She was the first black person ever nominated for or to win an Academy Award. And, of course, she played one of the maids there. And she was criticized by a lot of African Americans for playing a supposedly racist film. And she responded, and I love this quote, "I'd rather make $700 a week playing a maid than $7 being one," which I thought was a good comeback to that. In fact, she was unable, because of the color of her skin, was unable to attend the premiere in segregated Atlanta. And this outraged Clark Gable so much that he threatened to boycott the premiere unless she could attend. She didn't, but she actually convinced him to go. So a nice gesture by Clark Gable. Clark Gable, in fact, disliked this film a lot. It was his most famous film, but he regarded it as, quote, a woman's picture. He was so distressed that he had to cry on film. He almost quit. In fact, he was one of the really only a handful of actors considered for the role. Clark Gable, Gary Cooper, Errol Flynn, and Ronald Colman were basically the 4. For the role of Scarlett, that was a little different. That was a very wide casting net for that. Over 1,400 actresses were considered for that. Some of them, Jean Arthur, Lucille Ball, which I think is interesting, Tallulah Bankhead, Betty Davis, Claudette Colbert, Joan Crawford, Loretta Young, Katharine Hepburn, a host of others, but Barbara Stanwyck, a big name there. So pretty much everybody who was anybody, and then a lot of people who were nobodies were included in that wide casting role. Gary Cooper actually turned down the role of Rhett Butler because he didn't like the film. He was passionately against it. He said, Gone with the Wind is going to be the biggest flop in Hollywood history. And I'm just glad it's going to be Clark Gable who's going to fall on his face and not Gary Cooper.
Wow.
So Gary was clearly wrong about that.
No doubt about it. And it garnered so many awards, too. It really took the industry by storm. You mentioned Vivian Leigh. That was her high point, wasn't it, Joe?
Well, she went on to be in Streetcar Named Desire.
Oh, that's right.
But, yeah, I think so. I mean, in fact, she was, kind of I don't want to say a known name, but, relatively unknown at the time. And there was actually a poll. It was sort of a big promotional deal of this wide casting net for who will play, Scarlett O'Hara. And she only got a couple of votes from the public when they said, who do you want to play Scarlett O'Hara? So she was, relatively unknown.
How do you list this film personally as in the industry? Is this a top 10 for you?
It's not a top 10 in terms of favorites or best, because we've talked about this before. Those are two different lists. It's a great film. It's an iconic film. It represents the golden age of Hollywood very well. Obviously, in our current era and climate, there are some controversies and some problematic imagery in the film, and that's understandable, and we can certainly talk about those things as a society. But as a great Hollywood picture, it really stands, not alone, but way up there in terms of its scope and breadth. And, it comes out in 1939, which most people, film historians, argue is the best year in Hollywood history. The list is too long, but you had The Wizard of Oz and Stagecoach and Mr. Smith Goes to Washington and so many other films that year. It led the list.
There you go. Gone with the Wind as we go to film school with film study professor Joe Fortunato each Friday at this time here on the Ray Horner Morning Show. Joe, as always, my friend, thank you for the time. We'll do it again next Friday morning.
Thanks, Ray. Next week, everybody.
You got it. Joe Fortunato joins us Fridays on WAKR.